and other guests will be joining the presentation. If you don't mind to speak from the side of the room, then you'll be visible to the guests who can log in online.
What should I do?
So just stand here, but talk to
Okay.
from here. Thank you very much. Please join me in giving him a round.
Thanks for Professor Tony because she organized, she did a great job in organizing this meeting. Here, because there's an exchange with Cali University and the Faculty of Engineering, but we are trying to extend this exchange to the law faculty. We open the next years to win the call. There will be a new call, there will be a tech part. Okay, so yeah,
I think you'll be harassed from the computer at the moment.
I'd like to show you something, yes?
We did do a dry run, but this didn't happen when IT guy was here.
Is there anybody else in the room that has that's in the Zoom meeting?
Sorry, Prof. Shall we try again? And what are they saying?
Just saying to those volume in the system.
I think it's the line.
Between the microphone and the system.
Prof. Donnelly, can you just mute the sound on that laptop, please?
Kurt, that's a problem. I can't activate the mute button.
No, mute the sound on your actual laptop. Click on the sound on your laptop and
I
mute
know
it.
I'm clicking on it, Kurt. It's not muted. Getting me reduced. Shall we try again? Yes. Prof, I think we can try again. I'm sorry about that. So start with the PowerPoint. Here we go.
So, okay. So before talking about autonomous ship, I can show you where Sardinia is in the center of the eastern part, or western part, sorry, of the Mediterranean Sea. This on the left, of course, not so far from the coast. This 100 the stream is 111 kilometers from Italy. Two main ports, Cagliari and Olbia. Olbia is for passengers the biggest in Italy. Cagliari has a container port for transshipment and some present boating ports. This is Cagliari, the port inside the city. This is a container port. Only transshipment because industry in Sardinia is not so fair. Some words on autonomous vehicles, because we have a lot of autonomous vehicles at the moment. For instance, aerial drones, aircrafts. I can say that talking about aircrafts, that the technology is now is I can say major is the same meaning in English, but is ready to is currently acting, is working. The fact is that there are many legal issues, but the international legal system provides for rule for the drones. As you can read in Article 8 of the Convention of International Civil Aviation done in Chicago in 44, is a rule on aircrafts being flown without pilot. And the regulation that 9884 talks about pilotless aircraft, both piloted from a station on the ground or fully autonomous. That means that a software pilots the aircraft. Cars, software that's the Tesla, for instance, cars are arriving. The future, I read the survey that in the future we won't have our own car. We'll have fleets of electric cars that we can just call like Uber, no, with our smartphone, and so less. So the legal issues we have liability, ethical choice, the problem of mixed circulation in the past 10, 20 years, I think. But the industry seems away, and the legislators are working. For instance, in 2021, the Article 38 or 34 of the International Convention of Vienna on the Circulation of Roads changed, providing for rules for automated cars. I thought about mixed circulation, maybe will be the main problem. Can you imagine the same road, automated cars and cars with drivers? Maybe we'll have roads and streets forbidden to normal cars with drivers, reserved only to this kind to the automated car. It can appear unjust. The quarrel, similar quarrels in the 20s when motorways started to enter in the service, and then the owners of cars with horses say, why do you want to impede me to use that good, big and good motorway? But of course, no problem to reserve to only to cars with engine, that kind of roads. So in some cities and on some roads, we won't be allowed to circulate as drivers in next future. We have a different situation for ships because we don't have legal rules at the moment. When I say autonomous ships, I say ships with a pilot in a ground station, remotely pilot, or ships that can be completely autonomous because they have software, and maybe in the future an artificial intelligence that will drive the ship. The main problem at the moment seems to be the safety of navigation, and IMO received mandate to provide for rules, international share, to allow the kind of ships to navigate, to sail the sea. IMO started in 2018 to make its plans for autonomous ships, and the first thing at first IMO describes the 4 levels of automation. I think you read many times the first level, ship with automated process, but with seafarers on board that they can take in every moment the direction of the ship. I can compare this with our cars that have some electronics, for instance, for brakes or for many things, but are not so different. We have a second degree remotely pilot ship with personnel on board. For the third one, we have the real autonomous ship, that is a ship without seafarers on board, only piloted by a ground station. The fourth is the fully autonomous ships, the ship without pilot or nor on board, neither station, only the software that operates. IMO, sorry, in Italian it's IMO called that MAS, Maritime Autonomous Service Ships. I could ask, because why only maritime ships. So maybe too tight the definition. Why only surface ships? Ships can go as well underwater. But they were autonomous, that doesn't work because the remotely piloted ship is not autonomous. So maybe you can use simply unmanned ships, even if some scholars say that's not politically correct because men are not women. So I read something like this. It's too much, in my opinion, but so unmanned ships. But I will use mass, and we will have mass in the future as a definition. One more thing. There are a lot of surveys on navigation. Some surveys says that we will have autonomous navigation only in the deep sea for the ocean travels, and the crew on board, or maybe a remote pilot in the ports, in the straits, or where there are issues of safety of the navigation. Or sometimes the first example of fully autonomous ships is the Birkeland. That's is not, or better, is sailing near the coast. It's a coastal navigation. So maybe I think that we couldn't speak about autonomous ships, but autonomous navigation. I mean, you must use to, or you should be used to have different kind of seaworthiness in this case. You need different steps of the travel of the ship. As an example, we can compare the operation of drones, because drones can operate in 3 categories, like open, specific, and certified. Of course, there are some limit of size, weight, speed, but in general, the same drone can operate in the 3 categories. So even I think the ship must have this kind of regulation in the future. We'll see. The fact is, as I told you before, we have some problem with the international regulatory framework that at the moment that doesn't provide rules for provides for rules for unmanned ships. And the fact is, all the existing rules presume that the crew is on board. Above all, of course, the crew must be on board because the safety of navigation, according to international regulatory framework. For instance, there's some rule in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea that describes the power of the states and the power of the states over the all vessels flying their flag. There's Article 94 that presumes that the states must control as well all the equipments of the ships, but as well the manning of the ships. That refers to the manning of the ship. And Article 94, paragraph 4, ships in the charge of a master and office. That means the ship must be manned. As well, SOLAS, the International Convention for the Safety of the Life at Sea, the target of SOLAS, of course, is the safety of navigation of the life of seafarers and the passengers. This convention provides for, or presumes, many rules where the human factor or where the crew must be on board. There are many rules, but I prefer to go to the regulation 14 that says that all the ships must be sufficiently and efficiently manned. How does it work, Solas? The ship owners must ask the state to have the authorization to sail the sea. They must present a list of equipment and personnel that is on board for the safety of navigation. They approve and document that it must be on board. If the owner can prove that the ships is efficiently and sufficiently manned with zero crew on board, will it work? At the moment, maybe not, because maybe that is a superficial interpretation. Anyway, so as this kind of problem, or the rules that presumes the person on board, the same for Correct Convention. That is a reference to the bridge, to the navigation bridge. It seems for Correct. Correct refers to skills of the personnel on board, the good seamanship, and there's no good seamanship if there's no person on board. So that means that the owner of the ship that has damage is in fault because there's no crew on board. Maybe yes, maybe not. Is another obstacle that hinders the application of this convention to the navigation of autonomous ships. Rules on lookout. As well, the STCW, the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, Watchkeeping for Seafarers, of course, provides for rules that presume the personnel is on board. The convention shall apply to seafarers sailing on board seagoing ships, and the party of the convention must control and apply the law. So Denmark declared that in this case STCW won't work, but it's only a declaration. So just to go to IMO action. Okay, last years, 2 years ago, IMO launched scoping exercise. Oh, sorry. The goal of IMO was to determine how authorize mass safe navigation. And then I'm involved with two committees, and as well the third one is a facilitation committee. And they finished their work in May and July 2021, and they only simply match all the international convention with the needs of autonomous navigation, and identify a list of rules or a list of conventions that have provision which apply to mass and prevent mass operation, or have no application to mass, or apply but require some action or some change in the law. After the list, I will decide to promote the adoption of a non-mandatory instrument, a code conduct in 2024, and then the code in 2028, after 4 years, will become mandatory for all ships. So we will have maybe in 2028. There are many open issues, and for instance, I was saying that we need to decide, in case the ships remotely pilot or there's no pilot, it's only software, we will tell master, for instance, the pilot, the remotely pilot can be considered a master or a pilot, or in general a responsible person. Then there are some requirements in training and certification of this kind of seafarers, if they are seafarers. There are many other issues concerning watchkeeping, all the onboard operation that we don't have. But I'd like to concentrate just to have a discussion the part of discussion that I won't touch for the moment. For instance, I didn't know anything about the transfer of passengers. Can you imagine a cruise without a remote, without no crew on board, or without the captain on board, without the pilot on board, but the pilot is at the ground station? Will you feel safe to sail the sea, the ship that has no person on board? But talking about carriage of goods, it's not a problem of safety of the person. There are no passengers, no crew on board, and it says that chartered parties so flexible that can accept the position of a ship. Then we have some discussion with insurance companies, but in a charter we can write everything, so we can accept carriage of goods with an autonomous ship. But in case of between the parties, the charter parties, of course, but if a bill of lading has been issued after, when it has, and then another problem, of course, nautical fault, the clause that provides for that neither the carrier nor the ship should be responsible for loss or damage arising or resulting from act negative to the fault of the master, mariner, or pilot, or the servants of the carrier in the navigation or in management of the ship. That this rule comes from the Brussels Convention of 1944. He disappeared in Hamburg Convention of 78. He disappeared in Rotterdam rules of May of 2002. But that convention, they are not into force, or they are not accepted from the main part of the states that United States, England, South Africa as well. So, what is Article 40? Legally is an exception to the presumed liability of the carrier, and is historically based on the autonomy of the captain and the crew once the ship leaves the port. There's a compromise between the hard liability of the carrier and the fact that at the time, 1924, the owners or carriers couldn't control the ship once she left the coast. And even if they can control, that the captain on board is the only person responsible for the maneuver or the management or the navigation. The question is, if you have a damage to the cargo, can you invoke the owner of a carrier of an autonomous ship in the nautical fault to say there is an error of the pilot on the ground that has caused the damage, so I'm authorized not to pay damage? Is this the same situation, in your opinion? In this case, the remote pilot is not on board. We can apply the law by analogy. To use the analogy, I think this is similar, the system. We need to have a similar situation, similar case. One is provided for some rules from the law, one not, so we can apply to the other. But does this analogy work? Is the situation similar, in your opinion? The person, the captain on board you can say that this is similar to the pilot on the ground. First of all, can't compare the remote pilot to the captain or one member of the crew. Maybe yes, maybe not. Is the same the legal basis or the historical reason, in the sense that the carrier of the owner is both, because in the convention I both mentioned, versus convention I both mentioned, can give instruction to the remote pilot, to the captain not, of course, but if the remote pilot is not a captain, maybe he could receive instruction and must obey to that instruction. But after that, the historical reason, similarity in a situation, in my opinion, nautical fault is an exception to the principle of vicarious liability. Nautical fault is a kind of vicarious, or could be a kind of vicarious liability. Usually, door to law, but as well in order to the person obliged to perform an obligation, to perform a duty, bears all the liabilities from the person that he for its agents. That's a general rule, and if this is a general principle, nautical fault is exceptional compared with that general principle. And it's as well a rule of the instrument of analogy that you can't apply by analogy an exceptional rule. So in this case, maybe medical fault won't work. Another mass issue that we can consider. At the moment, we think to the station on the ground as a station of the owner of the ship. And in the station, there are employees of the ship owner. So, a normal case of vicarious liability in case of damage to the cargo or damage to the person. But in the future, in my opinion, we will have providers that offer their service to many ships and many owners. So this station, this group of pilots on the station can be considered independent from the ship owner. Maybe if an agent is independent, vicarious liability works. But in maritime law, sometimes in some international convention or in some contract appears clause that say that liability of the carriers doesn't work when damage has been caused by an independent contractor. We will have this in the future. We should think we should include some clause in the contracts. I have these two doubts that I can pose two questions: nautical fault and the position of the station on the ground. And I'd like to know something about you. Can I open a discussion on that?
Yes, of course.
Well, while you've got that screen up there, Professor,
Why?
while you have that particular screen of issues up there, what about harbours like our own, which are all compulsory pilotage harbours, where the pilots are in fact employees of the harbour operator? Is that not going to create even further complications?
Why complication? Because
Well, liability as to how the position of that kind of pilot operates in relation to an autonomous vessel.
I'm not sure I understand it.
It's okay. I'm not. Our harbours are compulsory pilotage harbours. You can't just pilot your vessel into harbours. You have to employ a pilot who's employed by the port operator. Now, how does the liability of the owner of the autonomous vessel, how is that affected by having to use a pilot who's employed by the port operator?
You mean the pilot that now you know there's a different kind of I think to pilots in the autonomous vessels that are on the okay. At the moment, the captain has the exclusive direction of the navigation, even if there is a pilot, even in the harbors. Of course, if that means that in case of an accident, the owner pays damage. But he can, I don't know in English the word for reversal action in case of, yes, okay, the owner can ask the compensation to the pilot because if the damage has been caused by the direction or the direction of the pilot. But this case can be different because in general we can say that the pilot on the ground is an employee or agent. The owner will be responsible for any damage. But if the owner only buys a service for an independent agent. Okay, as a general principle, it can be considered an agent, so there's the vicarious liability. Every time. But the law, for instance, for the sorry,
Steve.
okay, Stephen, okay. See that then being independent contractors are excluded from, or better, it's excluded liability of the carriers. Should we have the same treatment for the ground station independent from the owners? We can say yes or no, we can write in a contract, for instance. But I can see a problem because if we write it in the contract, closing the contract, in the law, there's a principle that you can accept your liability because it works like an exception of liability from vicarious liability. But the exception is only in Italian law, at least, is only for fault, not for intention. So, of course, you must demonstrate the damaged person must demonstrate the intention, but in this case, the clause doesn't work completely. The intention, maybe the parcel won't exclude all the liabilities, but one part going to the court will be included even if there's a clause in the contract. So lawyers must see that. That's one problem I can face. One more, I can imagine that owners won't be liable for a service they pay, and they are completely apart from that. So maybe we'll try to introduce in contracts this kind of clauses.
Yeah.
I think if I could chip in, would it even be possible to have a Transnet pilot on board an autonomous vessel? I think the harbour would have to rewrite its rules, and if they're going to permit such vessels to call, there would be a different set of rules altogether.
Might be a skills gap.
There might be, and I mean the remote pilot, the remote pilot station is nowhere near this jurisdiction.
Yeah.
I wondered about a different question of how this will affect the obligation to exercise due diligence to make the vessel seaworthy, which currently under the Hague and Hague-Visby rules is an obligation that only arises before and at the commencement of the voyage, but is one where even at that stage there will now be overlap between the vessel owners and what they are responsible for in terms of the vessel's seaworthiness, and potentially an independent contractor providing a remote piloting service and their responsibility in relation to the autonomous systems that will operate the vessel. Is this something that anyone has been writing about? I suppose by analogy, even if they're an independent contractor on the old line of cases that one is not exonerated, they would be, the owner would remain liable if there's negligence on the part of the. The ship is not?
Is it not seaworthy in a following state?
How would we apply the obligation of seaworthiness to an autonomous ship? How would we determine if she's seaworthy
At what point?
before and at the beginning of the voyage?
I don't know if manning is one of the requirements of seaworthiness. The unmanned ship is not seaworthy.
Right, okay.
At the moment, with the
Even if she's
with the
manned
current international
remotely.
convention, maybe because you say as well that is sufficiently and properly manned a ship that has 0 person on board because all the requirements satisfied and this state approved that. Not at the moment that, but so we don't need to change the international law. I know maybe we'll change SOAS for the ships. So I don't, maybe we shouldn't be worried about this case. But with the current law, the insurance companies will accept insure the cargo or pay damage to the cargo in case the ship can see unseaworthy. Because no man, no person on board. In general, all the surveys say that the navigation without crew is safe compared to the other kind because there are no accidents. Or it seems we won't have accidents because 90% of accidents come from the human factor. So it's not a big problem for insurance companies. But
Sorry, Professor. If I'm hearing you right, you're saying there might not really be a need to revisit the convention or to have introduced one. Are you in favor of maybe changing the parties' obligations contractually? If I'm hearing you right, how will that, for instance, in your example, the obligation that arises between the owner and the independent land-based operator bind a third party or not party to the contract at the time?
No binds. That obligation is only for between the operator and the operator on the ground and the ship owner.
So which means it can never be properly viewed as independent
Yeah.
on the bigger scheme of things.
Yes,
That's where my question.
yeah. The system says that an agent can be an employee or an independent contractor.
Yeah.
And that they are agents. But in maritime law, sometimes agents are considered or the fact, the fault of the agent, the damage caused by the agent, that does not involve the liability of the owner. Clause or the law Brussels Convention, for instance, modified in 78, sorry, 68. So I wonder why, I wonder if in this case the owners will have the same idea, and if there's space or there's room for them to ask to be responsible for the errors of the pilots on the ground. I don't think so. I prefer to consider agents and then carries liability for them.
Could a cargo owner sue the remote pilot station independently?
Could they?
If a cargo owner's damaged, I mean, I don't know if you'd know where to find them, but at least with a ship, you have a ship calling in port. So maybe it's a hypothetical question.
That goes in, right?
Yeah, essentially.
a lot. Have you seen that?
Can I divert the conversation a little? I mean, you've helpfully taken us through a number of international conventions, all of which at the moment are phrased on the basis that there are human beings on board the ship, filling they're the master and the crew. And there are all sorts of conventions, not only cargo liability, safety at sea, etc., which are based on having human beings on board who are actually managing the ship. Now, having looked at the enormous effort that went into, and I pick this just as an example, trying to get a new convention on cargo liability in the form of the Rotterdam rules, which are going to rot in hell as far as I can see. They're never going to get into force. How do you see any attempt to resolve those problems with a whole lot of conventions as autonomous ships come online? Because you're going to have pressure from the ship owners. I want to have autonomous ships. I don't want a crew. I want to do this. I've got good AI. I've got good people to run the shore installations. I don't need human beings there. How do you see the process of changing all those international conventions? I mean, we're not very good at that, are we?
But IMO wants to change, just to use this code for 4 years, just to have a trial, and then to put into force and as mandatory code. Talking about because National Convention on Transport, the liability of the carrier, they're not really involved. Then we have the problem with seaworthiness. But once seaworthiness is accepted for safety, why not for the rest of the navigation? Talking about, for instance, nautical fault, in my opinion, will disappear because there's no reason to maintain the exception for nautical fault, even if surviving. I don't know why survive. Maybe nautical fault, the exception. Do you think is useful for all navigation at the moment?
That's perhaps a broader question, because the basis for nautical fault is historic, and the lack of control which owners had over ships' operations, which is no longer not no longer, but far less the case than it used to be, because of the advances in communication. But if one's going to keep some concept of nautical fault, and it's quite narrow on the cases, should you be able to escape from liability as a carrier if it's not your master or your crew who went wrong, it's the IT department
as we saw earlier today
on shore in Iceland, radio sending messages to Ukraine, and sadly a war broke out, so we can't actually run our ships any longer.
Can I chip in here and just maybe we must wrap up in a minute or two, and it's been a fascinating discussion, but just for those in the room involved with training or even with operating vessels, where does this leave us in terms of the kinds of skills we need in seafarers of the future? Is that also something we need to be thinking about? Perhaps Captain Rosario has some thoughts.
The initial thing that came to my mind was, I mean, what are we trying to achieve in having autonomous ships? And what are we trying to save here? I mean, are we saying that with human intervention, the ships are unsafe? And we're trying to bring in a better factor of safety by having autonomous ships? Or is it cost saving in terms of not having crew on board, and paying? Because if you talk about the salary of the crew of the entire package that comes over a period of 1 month, when I used to still be sailing, I used to do a thing of about, let's say, $120,000 a month. $120,000 a month to today's fuel cost is just about 120 tons of fuel. Now, 120 tons of fuel is basically hardly 1 day's steaming, 24 hours steaming. So, I mean, what is the cost? Because the fuel cost is huge. It's a major cost. So, what are we really trying to save, and what are we trying to then put at risk? Because I do not see autonomous ships sailing, let's say, for example, when you mentioned Malacca Straits.
Yes.
When you talk about Suez Canal, when you talk about all the busy straits in the world, when you talk about navigating in congested waters where you have a lot of fishing boats. If you have to have a ship around, let's say, the coast of Shanghai or the Chinese coasts, you have, if you see the way the shipping with the fishing boats are populated on a radar, it's like a fair that's happening there, and the way you navigate is just you. I mean, on board the ship, I used to just give 1 degree help to starboard. This guy just goes, it's great. Then you go 1 degree. So that's the kind of complication we're talking about, and the speed has to be in control. You have to be able to. So I would say, yes, you can have autonomous ships on certain routes, like Professor mentioned, open seas, to an extent, but I cannot really foresee having autonomous ships as an entire package, and maybe it could be my as far as this is my practical knowledge, I do not see this quite being applied as a general scenario.
Autonomous ships are really expensive. Some people say 10 times as normal ship. So if the seafarers doesn't cost a lot, the seafarer costs the money. There's no interest at the moment. So we see in the future things can change. But yeah, really, talking about safety. Maybe the Department of Future of AE will tell us that it's better in any case to have a computer on board than to have a person. Maybe from 1 degree or vision ships, you can see anything on the screen, and then the computer works better than the human. They could say that.
Yeah, add just one little dimension here. I was quite interested in your distinction earlier between navigation on the open seas and in perhaps coastal or more constrained waters. I would have had a somewhat different view of that dichotomy, in a sense, that I would be actually terrified at the thought of operating an autonomous ship on the open seas. But if you had a very fixed coefficients set of operations, and I'm just thinking of a vessel, for example, that's shuttling across a Norwegian fjord, and is going from point A to point B, and there are very few unknowns, and there are probably less fishing boats per square nautical mile, shall we say, than there would be of Shanghai. There are very few unknowns, and I would have thought that those were the possible the possibly more fruitful applications of unmanned vessels. And you may well have a shore station, and you perhaps would hope that that shore station is in the Norwegian fjord and not in Iceland or in the Ukraine. But it would seem feasible then to control that operation quite successfully and quite safely from a remote station, which I would have thought of possibly as a remote master rather than a remote pilot, because it's actually a substitute for the navigating bridge of the ship and those that would man it, rather than a pilotage operation in a sense. But that's just pure semantics. So if there is a practicability of this, I would have seen it actually more in very fixed coefficients sheltered waters rather than in open seas operations.
Well, there is the example of the Yara Birkeland. I think she's doing exactly that.
Yeah.
Just short
Yes,
coastal
yes,
transits.
Yes. There are two options. Some things that better to have autonomous navigation people in the deep sea, and some person no better to have near the coast just to check, control, and deep sea.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much to everybody else for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have a few bodies in the Maritime Studies Unit and a chance for us to hear some interesting, albeit still at this stage, slightly futuristic ideas and projections. But who knows, maybe in 20 years' time, we're sitting here and this is the new normal. So thank you for bearing with us with our technical difficulties. Hopefully we will manage the hybrid program that we have planned this semester with our students coming back to campus. And hopefully we will all have another chance to meet again. But thank you very much for joining us, and everyone who's online, thank you very much as well for being with us.